alone. Please, Lordy, don't you leave me. Guide me on my way. The night is beautiful. So are the faces of my God's people. The stars are beautiful. So are the eyes of my God's people. Beautiful also is the sun. Beautiful also are the souls of my God's people. Kumbaya, my Lord, kumbaya. Kumbaya, my Lord, kumbaya. Kumbaya, my Lord, kumbaya. Oh Lord, kumbaya. Kumbaya, Gullah for come by here. Welcome to Boone Hall Plantation, one of the many plantations along what we call the Gullah Geechee corridor that gave birth to the Gullah Geechee people and the Gullah Geechee dialect. West Africa, Senegambia, Gambia, Sierra Leone, Angola, Liberia, Nigeria. They brought us from West Africa to these parts specifically to work the rice plantation. Me no eat no beans, bet out the rice. Me no eat no beans, bet out the rice. Red rice, brown rice, wimpin' rice, okra and rice, hoppin' John, rice cake. Me no eat no beans, bet out the rice. The West Africans knew how to properly irrigate that ground so that the rice crop could flourish. And we made master rich off of that product called Carolina Gold rice. Me no eat no beans, bet out the rice. Gullah for I don't eat any beans without rice. In the Gullah kitchens of Charleston, South Carolina, and all along the corridor, dinner is not a complete dinner if rice is not being served. You can have your baked potato, your mashed potato. You can have spaghetti and meatball. But if rice is not on the table, dinner is not yet ready. And when you burn and you scorch your rice, you probably throw it away. But we don't throw that away. We eat that. We call it a rice cake. And every New Year's Day, we have a special rice dish we call Hoppin' John. Hoppin' John is field peas and rice cooked together with a little as a casserole, and we eat that every New Year's Day for good luck and blessings for the upcoming New Year. Now, when they dropped us off on this side of the ocean, we got dropped off all along what we now call the corridor, the Gullah Geechee corridor, starting down there in Jacksonville, Florida, coming up to Brunswick and Darien, Georgia, where they put us off at Sapelo Island, St. Simon Island, Jekyll Island, St. Mary's Island. When that ship got to Savannah, they brought us through a port of entry we call the Ogeechee River. When it landed in Beaufort, they put us off at Port Royal. We ended up on Defusky Island, St. Helena Island, and Ladies Island. And when that ship got out to the Charleston port, we got dropped off on this side of the river at a place called Sullivan Island, where Fort Moultrie at today. And that's where we had to stay to be quarantined before they put us on the auction block. Well, after emancipation, we got free. Most of you Gullah Geechees, we ended up on all the different sea islands in Charleston. Johns Island, James Island, Warnmelo Island, Eddystone Island, Young's Island, even Sullivan Island at one time. You travel up 17 north, you get to Georgetown, South Carolina, where Georgetown was known as one of the largest places of rice plantations close to this area in the Low Country. Well, Georgetown also was the home of Mrs. Michelle Obama's mother. And her great-great-grandfather worked a rice plantation in Georgetown, and that particular plantation was just up for sale about 2 years ago. You travel outside of Georgetown, between Pawleys Island and Myrtle Beach, there's a small island called Sandy Island, a little small island full of Gullah Geechee people. No bridge. They don't want no bridge. And all these years, the only way they've been able to travel back and forth is by boat or raft, their own. But last April 2011, they received their first official ferry for transporting back and forth. You travel outside of Myrtle Beach, you got Little River, South Carolina, Little River, North Carolina, and Wilmington, North Carolina. We call that entire stretch from Jacksonville, Florida to Wilmington, North Carolina, the Gullah Geechee corridor, the port of entry for the West Africans brought to these parts of the Americas in slavery. Now, I know you done hear all the stories and all the things that happen to us when we first get to this South. How we get beat, how we get flogged, how we got raped, how we got our limbs cut off when we tried for runway. Yep. All them things happen to us, and some worse. But we as a people, there was nothing else we could do but keep our stories in our heart, for sing our songs, for do our dance, for laugh, for make merry. That's how we survive from that day to this day. Now keep in mind you had a few of them slaves that got treated fine by the master because they worked in the master's household, had a close relationship. But for the most part, your average slave on the many different plantations, first coming here, they endured harsh and severe treatment. But even that had to let up so that we could get the work done that they brought us to this side to do. Now, Boone Hall Plantation at one time was just a piece of land. Major John Boone acquired portions of this land as a wedding gift. When he married Elizabeth Patey, his father-in-law gifted them 468 acres of land, and they decided to have us work 3 major crops: cotton, indigo, and rice. Now, for the Boone family, the cash crop was the indigo and the cotton. That indigo was that plant that produced the blue and purple dye. Well, they kept the plantation for some years, gathered more acreage, and then eventually the master and his wife passed away. Their son Thomas inherits the plantation, and he keeps it for a few years, and then he sells it to some Russian owners. From that point on, plantation changes hands several times. And in the early 1800s, the Hallback family, Mr. Hallback and his 2 sons, when they got to the plantation, they decided to go into the brick-making business. Now, the Hallbacks were from Germany. They resided in Charleston, but when they purchased the plantation, they decided to go into the brick-making business. The slaves, under the Hallbacks, were putting out millions of brick off of Boone Hall, providing loads of brick for many of our historic sites, churches, homes, buildings, scattered all across the state of South Carolina. When we talk about original brick, this cotton gin house to my right, all of that brick made by slaves. Now, that particular house housed the ginning equipment. That's where they kept that equipment that would separate the cotton from the seed. And those 9 slave cabins, all of those slave cabins are original brick made by slaves. Not original roofing and floor work, but original brick. And the oldest building on Boone Hall Plantation is the smokehouse. That's where we kept the master's meat fresh. Little short brick-shaped building in the front yard of the master's house, no window. And the process went like this. We would kill the wild game. Your deer, your turkey, your quail, your duck, your geese, your hog, your pig. Clean the meat, got the meat off if you had to. And then you would soak that meat down real heavy. That's the process of smoking. And then you would hang the salted meat from the ceiling of the smokehouse. They'd start a fire on the ground. That fire would burn for hours, and then they would put the fire out. And the next process would be to fan the smoke. And that smoke rising up to the ceiling, they call it smoking the meat. Curing the meat, keeping the meat fresh for when time for master to eat. Now, when we first get to the plantation, we used to eat the scrap off a master table. How so? Well, I wouldn't know, but that's the story my great-grandmama told us. My great-great-grandmama, she was a sharecropper and a slave. After emancipation, she had no place to go. So she elected to stay on the farm and work for her room and board. But when we were young, she would tell us about how they would ring a bell. And at the ringing of the first bell, we would go to the trough, and we would gather our food from the trough to our hand to our mouth. But we had a tendency to eat fast because you didn't know when that second bell was going to ring. And when that second bell rang, you had to hurry and move away from the trough so that the next group of slaves could go forward and eat. We didn't understand it when we were young, but she used to chide us all the time with, "Look, you children, why are you trying to choke your food down so fast? Slow down, you eat. Ain't nobody trying to ring no bell. Go." Now, when master stopped to let us eat meat, we started eating off the low end of the hog. That's why we, people in my culture, we love to eat all parts of the pig. The pig foot, the pig tail, the pig knuckle, the hog head cheese, the skin of the hog and the pig. We fry it in the hog's own grease we call lard, and we call that food crackling. Today, crackling is your pork skin processed and put in a bag. Mm-hmm. And how low can you go? Let's try the hog's intestines. That's right. That's how low we went. The hog's intestines. We call it chitlins. You say chitlins, Gullah said chitlins. Now when you put a pot of chitlins on the stove, years ago they used to smell the high heaven. But the key to a good pot of chitlin is you got to clean them really, really good. A 20-pound case of chitlin usually takes you about 2 to 3 hours. That's the key to a good tasting pot of chitlin, how well you clean. But I want you to know that since emancipation, we all are now eating high on the hog. We eat the pork chop and the ham. Thank you, ma'am. Now, Gullah, a people, a nation. Now, after the during the Hallback's time, not only did we work the brick, but we also planted pecan trees. Boone Hall Plantation at one time was one of the largest retailers of pecans than any other business all over the world. And in 1911, they had anywhere from 14,000 to 15,000 trees standing. And in that same year, a storm came through when they weren't naming storms, and they took out some 12,000 to 13,000 trees. If you've been on a tram ride, you know all of that open space on the other side of the plantation where they hold the reenactments throughout the year. That's an area where a lot of the pecan trees stood. Today, we have many trees still standing, some producing nuts and some not producing nuts. Well, the Hallback sold the plantation to a lumber company, and then they brought it back from the lumber company, and then they sold it again. And then it changed its hands several times. And in the early 1900s, 1935, Mr. Thomas Stone, he was from Quebec, Canada, Canadian diplomat, naval officer, and a newlywed, came down south, visited several plantations, and he and his wife fell in love with Boone Hall Plantation. And in 1935, he purchased 4,800 acres of Boone Hall Plantation for $60,000. And one of the first things that they did, build the house that you see standing, which is the fourth house on the plantation. And if you take a walk down between the last two cabins, they're probably setting up for a wedding or reception this evening, is the cotton dock. Now the cotton dock was where we would take all of the cotton goods, package it, and prepare it to be boated out to the port city of Charleston to be placed on the larger ships. Well, in 1989, Hugo blew the original dock down, and it was rebuilt in 1992 under our present owners. Today, Boone Hall Plantation is owned by a sister and brother team, Mr. Willie H. McCrae and his sister Elizabeth. Mr. McCrae was a year old when he first came to the plantation. His sister was 11 years old, and that was back in 1955. Their father was a vegetable trader with the Caribbean islands, and he purchased this plantation as a gift to his wife, Gullah. Now, coming off the many slave ships, we came bringing many of our crafts and our giftings, and one that's still long-standing in our culture today is the gift of basket making. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that the original basket makers in the slave family actually were our men. The men made the big work baskets that were used to gather the crops out of the field. Well, the women wanted to weave, but they found that the material that the men were using was too rough on their fingers. The men were using split oak and white oak bark. The women were already using the sweetgrass for their straw brooms. So they went to adding the bulrush. Now you get your bulrush from your marsh areas. It's a darker, longer straw, much heavier than sweetgrass. Sweetgrasses we get today from our swamp areas and the beachfronts, called sweetgrass because while it's growing it has a sweet scent. We also add the longleaf pine needle for color and the palmetto branch. This palmetto, this beat up leaf here from the palmetto tree, which is our state tree, they use the leaves from the palmetto to wrap the baskets in. Now this is called a starter basket. Most of the instruments used is now the bottom part of a teaspoon, we call a bone, and they cut off the cup portion, file the neck area, and they use that pointed part of the bone to pierce the space in the already wrapped sweetgrass so that they can slide the palmetto on top and continue weaving and adding material. Now, here in the Mount Pleasant area, this is where most of our basket weavers originated. Why? Because years ago, this place was full of all the materials. It was easy to pull your sweetgrass and your bulrush from the marsh and swamp areas in this area. But because of development, all of that has grown slim. But in the market downtown, historic market, Four Corners of Law, you'll see a lot of the basket weavers, and most of them are from Charleston, from this side of Charleston. And out here on Highway 17, they call it the Sweetgrass Basket Scenic Highway. You will see basket stands on both sides of the road. The governor in the state of South Carolina has deemed that as the historic Sweetgrass Basket Scenic Highway. Basket weavers don't have to pay sales taxes on their sales. And a lot of the stands are, like I said, on both sides of the road, some in front of